Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and this is What the Wernick. I decided to do the What the Wernick today as a response to this horrific um political violence that we see in the country. Um, and I'm not just responding to this. We had earlier this year, we had I think the assassination of the state representatives in Minnesota, and apparently that person had a hit list of a bunch of other people that he allegedly intended on killing, and they were Democrats. I think if we uh, look back at some of the uh, political assassinations that have occurred. We've had Democrats targeted, we've had Republicans targeted, uh, and it's all really a shame that we are trying to basically attribute this to some sort of collective action that every time a Democrat is targeted, that every MAGA or Republican or person is responsible for that, and every time a Republican or MAGA is targeted, that's the work of some sort of radical left progressive, lunatic. And basically, what we have is we just have an exchange of insults and exchange of insults as if there is a group responsibility for all these crimes. I think that one of the reasons why I have funded platforms like Parler in the past, and even giving some money to Gab, and now with BitChute, is that my commitment is that we resolve our differences, or we agree to disagree through through discussion, through debate, through discourse. The when I think many of us, I don't know generation, because I'm pushing 70. um, but when I went to elementary school, never they like nursery rhymes you learn, and one of them is like, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never harm me. So so that we can't really be harmed by the things people say, but we are but that as long as we feel good and happy about ourselves, whatever judgments and anybody else makes about us should be completely irrelevant to us. I like this quotation from Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein said, "Weak people revenge, strong people forgive, intelligent people ignore." I think our obligation is to be intelligent people. I mean, it's better to be strong than weak, but it's better to be wise, even better to be wise and intelligent. And a wise and intelligent person, ignores words that to them are just noise. So as long as we are comfortable with whatever we believe, and our beliefs don't harm anyone, we just got to agree to disagree, and our disagreement should never be resorting to violence. That's not a response to not getting what you want to get. So in life, you're mostly not going to get what you want to get. In baseball, a great hitter hits like 300, and they're an exceptional hitter. Most hitters who play professional baseball, they hit 275 is a good hitter, 250, you're still in the starting lineup. And these are the best of the best, and they're basically getting out, three-quarters of the time. In basketball, very few players shoot 50%. So you have a whole bunch of people on a starting team who also are the best of the best of the best. And, the teams, if you look at their statistics every night, they probably shoot as a team 43, 45%. So, which means, almost 6 out of every 10 shots they're taking, they're missing. So when we take a look at the best of the best of the best, they're not used to having success every time, or even most of the time. They have it enough of the time and a lot better than everybody else, and that's what earns them, the extra dollars, and them being a professional and somebody else not reaching, to that status. So so we go through life, hoping to have a reasonably good batting average of getting the things that are important to us, and we're mostly responsible for getting it ourselves. That no third party has anything to do. And if we look at most of the things that we argue about on a day-to-day basis, really many of them don't really impact our day-to-day life. Many people do not like illegal immigrants and want mass deportations. And many of the people feel this way live in communities where they don't have many illegal immigrants. So from a certain perspective, it's not affecting their day-to-day life. I mean, some of them think it is because, and if their labor market doesn't have, many illegal immigrants in their labor market, it's not impacting their salaries. In the most part, there's very little empirical evidence that really illegal immigration is really driving wages down. So some people might believe it, but there's no real strong evidence that that's the case. And the evidence is that illegal immigrants, and I don't want to make this about illegal immigration, I'm just trying to illustrate a point, is that many of the things that we think that bother us, really, they bother us because maybe we philosophically don't like them, but that doesn't mean they're really impacting our quality of life on a day-to-day basis, except an issue, that really, we have strong feelings about, and we have strong feelings about it to the point that we want to impose our feelings on everyone else, and we think everybody should feel exactly the same way we should feel, and that's just a wrong way of thinking. A saying that I like to repeat over and over again is that we were not born a sovereign nation. We were born a nation of sovereign individuals. That's what our founders wanted us to be, a just society where we pursued liberty, and liberty is a very individual concept. It's not a collective concept. It's not a group concept. It's an individual concept. And basically the U.S. for the 19th century and the early part of the 20th century was a society built by rugged individualists. They had no expectations that anybody would do anything for them, and that they had to do for themselves. And if things didn't work out, they knew the person responsible was themselves. And if things worked out, they lived with the consequences, the good and the bad, and had no expectation that anybody else had a responsibility for making their life better. Okay, what do we have? We have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's no guarantee of happiness. We have the right to pursue happiness, and that's a right every individual has. We have to think about, our challenge really for maintaining our republic was not figuring out how we govern others, but how we govern ourselves. This was an exercise in self-government. That really the effort was that how do we live lives with even less government? That's how evolution as a species is, not to require more government, not that we need more people to do things for us, not that we need third parties to help us live our life. As the fact is that how do we live? How do we continue to become better versions of ourselves? So we need less government. That really should be the objective, I think, of every human being. Is to figure out how my evidence that I'm evolving as a species, that I'm evolving as a human being, is the fact that I'm behaving in a way where my behavior doesn't cause damage to any third party, and I'm responsible for my own life. And I got to make my own success. And if I don't make my own success, the only one I have to blame is myself, and I shouldn't blame anybody else, for my predicament. That doesn't mean you don't mean unreasonable people out there. It doesn't mean people who might dislike you for reasons that you don't think are fair. But the point of it is, there's no guarantee that anything has to be fair in life. I mean, it's just a matter of, I had a my investment in Parler, that could have been worth, 30, 40, 50, $100 million. To me, and and then what happened? That Parler got taken away by accusations that later have been proven false. Parler was accused of being where the quote insurrection was organized. and Apple and Amazon called Parler, a threat to national security. And then when they had the hearings on January 6th, there was an acknowledgement that basically almost none of this was organized on Parler. And Parler had no capacity for even organizing it because there were no groups in Parler. People couldn't really DM each other. You can't really, the search in Parler was terrible, so you really can't find other people, at the time. So it was clear that any rational thinking person would say, Parler really had nothing to do with this. And why is Parler, being without any real evidence? If anyone really got Tim Cook and the chairman of, Amazon Web Services and the chairman of Google, whoever made the decision, they ever got them under oath and say, what did you see that was so unique to Parler as opposed to everybody else, and why didn't you take down Parler? They probably would not come up with a good answer, to that question. So, the consequence of that had a very significant impact on me, tens of millions of dollars. But I didn't go out and consider that I'm going to go commit violence against any of these parties, nor would I have encouraged anyone, even if people were. I had, at that point in time when I was involved in Parler, I had people of the from the media calling me, and they wanted to get the names of people working at Parler. We had some people who were trying to sneak in through other Parler employees, trying to figure out who worked at Parler, and they wanted to find out who was supporting Parler as third parties. What was their intention? Their intention was to dox them, and they knew if they doxed them that people would be making threats to them, and that if they received threats, they say it's not working, they quit, and they basically wanted a campaign of people threatening Parler employees to the point where they felt that in order to preserve their personal security, they'd have to not work the company. So, that was their effort. They wanted to know, it's not like the media. And I would speak to some of the journalists and I would say, and again, I don't mean this attack on them either, they're doing their job. But I would ask them, I'd say, you're asking me this information. How do you think people are going to use this information? I'm not saying it's an unfair question. I'm saying is, if I give you this information, which of course I'm not going to give you, how do you think people will use it? Okay. So, telling me why am I hiding the people employees are? Because and I've told you that people are being threatened that work here. So that if we put these names out, that they'll be out in other social media platforms, they'll be doxxed, and there'll be people who will threaten them. And why would I want to subject anybody that comes to here and takes the risk of coming to work, to be exposed to those type of threats? So no way I'm not. I'd like to cooperate with you. I like to be transparent, but not transparent to the consequences of putting at risk another party, and I understand you're doing your job. I understand you don't control the behavior of other people, but you certainly know the consequences of the question, and I think you certainly know that what the consequence would be if I did give you that information, and that really in your way, it's your way of helping to, shut down, keep Parler shut down. But, did I get angry about it? Did I feel I wanted to commit violence about it? No, my job at that point in time was to help protect the security of the people that worked for the company, even though I was not an officer of the company. I had a vested interest in the company, and having a vested interest in the company, I was actively involved in helping the management team whenever they asked, and they asked a lot for my help. So I was very diligent in trying to help and give the best advice I could, in order to keep the people protected and whatever the consequences were. But, it's just, life is not fair, that we just have to accept the life is not fair. But we also have to say that if we continue to do the right thing most of the time, and we're talented, and we're persistent, and we're consistent, and we're constant, and we think about how we can add value to other people and add value to ourselves by adding value to other people. That's the great thing about the capitalist system. The way you have success is by creating value for somebody else. And if people think that they're doing value for somebody else, they'll pay you for it. And then the more valuable they think it is, the more they'll pay you it. So the better you are at serving other people, the more success you have yourself. And that's the wonderful thing about the capitalist system. It's really driven on how my success is a function of how well I satisfy the needs, wants, and desires of other people. So I only get to satisfy my own needs, wants, and desires if I'm good at satisfying the need, wants, and desires of other people. And if I'm not good at satisfying the needs, wants, and other people, well, I have to look at myself and say, well, maybe I don't have this skill. And as a consequence of not having the skill, maybe I'll not make the same type of money as other people who are good at it. But that's our capitalist system. That's the greatest thing about our capitalist system, is that you really, outside of cronyism, where there's something corrupt with the government, where the government gives special perks and special privileges, but that's only for, the most part, big companies or big labor or unions or people who are successfully in organizing themselves in a way that they have political power. So it's really that they get to be able to get compensation not tied to the value they give, but they get to get value, extract value as a consequence of the political power they have. And that's the thing we should, as a society, try and speak out against. That's the type of thing we should not tolerate. We should want a world where the people who are successful because they've done something that a lot of people value and a lot of people are willing to pay a lot of money for. What we don't want is, we don't want people to be successful, because they've corrupted the political process. But if people do get that way, the response should still never be, it should never be violence. Unfortunately, we're a society that's become, in many ways, I mean, like right now, you see, you have some people going out celebrating, this horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I knew him. I didn't know him well, but I knew him. I met him in person several times. He actually, early in his career, he came to me pitching me to, put money into Turning Point USA, which I did not do. So I had philosophical differences, really not on politics. I was very interested in providing education, actually, on laissez-faire capitalism, and I wanted to fund an educational program inside Turning Point USA that would have basically, if you had somebody who was involved in Turning Point USA, I wanted to basically create a curriculum where they could really study, the people like Milton Friedman and Hayek and Mises. And so I wanted them to increase the economic literacy of the people involved in Turning Point USA. And so I wanted to earmark my funding specifically, for that. And I wanted to be able to then monitor their progress to see how successful they were, and continuing funding would be based upon the success. And he turned it down. Oh, shit, I think I'm freezing here. I don't know if I'm having problems with my internet. I'm back here. I seem to be having problems with my internet today. I apologize for that. I did know him. It's sad to see somebody die that you know, but it's sad to see anybody die. So some people are saying, I'm happy he's dead because of his political views. They were horrible, and some people are saying it's the greatest tragedy on earth. And it's the greatest tragedy on earth because I'm in agreement with his political views. If somebody, I think if George Soros got assassinated, I don't think, I think Trump and other people would probably say, terrible that this happened, and I think a lot of MAGA would be celebrating because because in their definition, Soros is an evil person, and in many Democrats' definition, Charlie Kirk is an evil person. And I think this whole attitude of really celebrating something bad that happens to somebody else, we should never wish anything bad on other people. We want good things for ourselves, and we shouldn't want anything bad, to anyone else. One of my early mentors, told me, when you negotiate, never look inside other people's pocket. If you're happy that what goes into your pocket, that's all you need to care about. Whatever the other person walks away with, you shouldn't care, as long as you're happy with what you got. And I think that's a generally good attitude to have, in life is, don't ever want anything bad for other people. Want stuff good for you, but don't ever want anything bad for somebody else. We really have to change how we communicate with people. There's some evidence that was presented in the media that boat that left Venezuela that supposedly had Trinidad people on it, and they were coming to the United States, and they were filled with drugs that would convert the entire U.S. population into drug addicts, and therefore they would then undermine the U.S. and take it over, or whatever premise that they had. That when the boat apparently spotted the military, and there's some evidence that the boat was turning back. So if the boat was turning back, it's no longer a threat. So whoever they were, if they no longer were coming in our direction, they were going in the opposite direction. And we really I don't see what evidence has been presented, that we really know who they were, what their intentions were, and what their destination, was. And we could have interdicted if we knew they were coming, if we knew that they were coming to the U.S. and we knew where they were going to, we could have picked them up, arrested them, and given them a process of due process. But instead, we just killed them. And some people think it's justified, and some people think it's not justified. So many people think it's murder. Normally, if you kill somebody who's not an imminent direct threat to you, that's considered murder. So many people can say we murdered these people, and then there's a legitimate argument for saying it's murder. Some people think there's a legitimate argument that this is, national security, even if no case was made other than to make words. And we've already heard the government make claims of people being tied to Trinidad that are not tied to it. And if you read a lot of the filings that the administration has made in various courts, that they've made allegations and statements that they then back away from when the judges have pushed them further about some of the statements that they've made, and they tend to then not back away from those statements. And when the judges have asked them, do you retract? You say, no, I don't track it. Well, then do you affirm it? No, I don't affirm it either. So the judge says, well, if you're not affirming it, then I'm assuming you're retracting it if you're not affirming it. So if someone really read all these filings of these cases rather than made judgments, and then what do we hear from the people then what do we hear when the judges are making rulings against the Trump administration? How are they being characterized at? Radical, leftist, treasons, haters of the country. I mean, and now you see the people from the left also describe. When I remember back when people first started using the term deplorable, towards in 2016 towards Trump supporters, when they were echoing, when the words that when Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters not only deplorable, she said they were irredeemably deplorable. And I would speak to people who I knew who were not MAGA. I'm not MAGA myself. I'm an anarchist, so I don't believe in any government. I don't like either party. I don't like anybody governing me. And I don't like anybody making claims to my property for their benefit unless I think it's useful. So, and it's voluntary. But I also follow the law. So I do it not because I want to. I do it because I feel compelled to do it because I don't want the consequences of not following the law. So I don't want to lose my freedom. So I don't think about whether it's just or fair or right. I do it because, the cost of not doing it, I'm not prepared to pay. So, but not because I have any sense of conviction, of doing it, other than conviction towards, not wanting to be placed in jail for not complying with laws that society has determined that they want to impose on everyone. And so I'm not here to judge it. I just got to live up to it, and then hope that, as I continue to engage in conversations with people like I'm doing now, that you can basically influence some people and maybe have them rethink things and maybe reconsider things, and that, and it's the marketplace for ideas. And that's what we should participate in the marketplace for ideas, and we should be tolerant of all sorts of ideas, whether we agree with them or disagree with them. It's as long as we have a process where things can only get done if there's broad consent. We should trust that if everything gets done that requires broad consent, the fact is that we're not going to become extreme in any point of view if it requires broad consent. If we take a look at some of the things that people don't like about today, whether it's too many immigrants coming in or mass deportations, wherever you feel on that issue, those are issues that were never resolved by broad consent. They were resolved by presidential fiat. We had one president who decided to basically have a very porous border and had millions of people pour in, and people thought there were too many coming in than our ability to absorb them. And then we have somebody who said, enough is enough, and many people agree with that. Maybe even more than half the people agree with that. And then the question is what's our criteria for deportations? Should we just deport the worst of the worst of the worst? Should we just round up everybody and not care how we do it? The reality is that's not been done by consent. So because we elected a president does not mean we elected the president to do whatever. We didn't elect Biden to have absolute discretion, nor did we elect Trump to have total discretion. We elected them to have ideas and then have to sell them to Congress, and that ultimately Congress would have to vote on these issues. And it's that process of going through the consent, when we felt at least a consent, at least people felt there's an outcome that was a process that they respect, as opposed to a process that they don't respect. So it's as legitimate for many people in MAGA and many people who believe that immigration is a threat to our national security and our economic security. It's easy to understand why people can say, well, we had laws and Biden didn't do a good job of enforcing those laws. And so I'm angry, and Congress didn't discipline him. So I'm angry at Biden, and I'm angry at Congress for not disciplining him. So I'm going to elect a different Congress and a different president. And now another group of people are angry because ultimately none of this was done because Congress could pass legislation that where there could be compromises where basically maybe nobody is happy, but now you have a situation where you have half the country very unhappy and half the country happy, and then rotates around. The next time around, half the country is happy and the other half is unhappy. Instead of getting to a consensus where people say, oh, well, I got something from what I wanted, and I could be happier, but at least I got some acknowledgement of my position on the issue. So who knows? Maybe they could have come up with a deal. At one point, Biden did have a proposal on the table that a few Republicans did support. That was some sort of compromise bill. And but as a society, why did they not able to get success as a compromise bill? Because it's a society that people don't want to compromise anymore. We don't want to have conversations. We don't want to debate with each other. Okay, we don't want to have substantive conversations with each other. We want to impose our will on each other. So we want to make one group of people subject and subordinate to another group of people, and we want people who become subjected to and subordinate to another group of people to accept that status that they have junior status. That they're underprivileged citizens as opposed to privileged citizens. And basically all people have is a competition for power, and that competition for power means the tyranny of the majority. So I think the fact that people really are supporting the concept of tyranny by majority, and I'm not saying this of MAGA, I think it's as true of the left as it is the right. It's as true of the Democratic Party as I think it's the Republican Party, that they want to each party wants to get control over all three branches, and impose its views the most efficient way possible, not the process that requires the most consent. They're looking to accomplish things in a way that requires the least consent, and they're constantly looking for loopholes to do things that require as little consent as possible. When a country that has over 330 million people, we would hope that anything that really has significant impact on many people, we would hope that this would go through a process where there's consent. So, and I said this is a flaw, not just of people accusing. I think Trump is trying to grab more power, and he's better at it than the Democrats are. But I think it's the goal of each political party is to grab as much power as possible and govern with as little accountability to the public as possible, and to do as little by consent as is possible. And that's reflected in our attitudes is that we want to get somebody who will do what we want. And when we get that person, we're happy. And when we don't get that person, we're very unhappy. And if we take a look at the language we use, we're in a culture war, okay? War. I mean, we got the Department of War. We don't have a Department of Peace. We're not about preserving the peace. We're about doing war, committing acts of violence against other people, not keeping people safe, not keeping people secure, not keeping people at peace, not living in harmony. Our words are words of aggression, aggression towards others, aggression towards people, we don't agree with. And it's like our whole identity, is tied up in all this, what I consider, bullshit. And most people should consider bullshit. Politics should just not be that important to us. Most of our life, and I asked many people, when Biden, was president, I said, Biden did a lot of things you don't like, but can you explain to me how your life was worse off? And most of the people could not tell me how their life was worse off. They were more angry. They were more angry because they didn't like certain things. But I asked them, is your salary going down? Did you lose your job because of Biden? I mean, tell me, how is your day-to-day life impacted? Tell me what piece of legislation really impacted your life, and impacted it significantly for the worse. Tell me right now how much worse your life is today than it was the day before yesterday, and almost nobody could give me an answer. I'm not saying some people didn't lose their jobs and, didn't get the type of raises they were getting, but most of the people couldn't tell me how their life on a day-to-day basis materially changed, other than the fact that, too many immigrants. How are you being hurt by it? No, but I don't like it. Okay, so I mean, we just because we like it, don't like things, even if it really doesn't have a direct impact on our life, it seems to have a strong emotional impact on us. But then we have to ask ourselves why. What gives us the right to determine that the world should be shaped according to our views? Well, how arrogant is that the world should be shaped for our convenience? Then we think we're God, that the world should be designed according to our design. Okay, and if it's not designed for our design, and the people who impede the way in having the world, not designed in the way we want designed, that we want to commit acts of violence to get them. Many people in this country, more people in the country think that it's inevitable that there'll be violence in this country. People talk about a civil war. We have people that talk about retribution. We have people say that this assassination was deserved, and maybe they think more of them should happen. This is really, we have to take a look at ourselves and say, what kind of humanity do we have? That we condone this type of violence. Violence is only should be legitimate if there's a direct, imminent physical threat to us. That's an existential threat to us. If it's not, why should we ever resort to violence? Because we disagree with somebody? We don't like, yes, the people being deported, many people sit back and say this is inhuman, deporting these people, and other people saying this will make the lives of citizens better, and their views that should be legitimately debated with facts and evidence, with reason, and that we should have this discussion. But this discussion should be, well, you're an open border, so you hate the country. You want to deport everyone. You're an evil human being. Instead of sitting back and saying, can you explain to me why? And let's go through the evidence. Nobody seems to want to have that conversation. Nobody wants to have a conversation saying let me understand why you feel so strongly about this, and let me explain to you why I feel so strongly, about this. We don't seem to want to have those conversations. When I raised my daughter, something I used to tell her all the time, and it's something I try and live by myself, obviously, because I won't try and tell her to do things that I don't set a good example on, or set an example. People can judge whether it's a good or bad example, but it's an example. Is that I say, if you want to be understood, first try and understand. So if I want someone to understand me, I think if it's important for me for somebody to understand me, and it's not really necessarily important for me that many people understand me, but if I do want somebody to understand me, why would it be reasonable for me wanting to be understood by somebody else if I'm not willing to reciprocate and try and understand them? So anyone who I feel I want to understand me, and if we're having a debate and discussion with people, then we're looking for understanding. So once we open our mouth and start communicating with another person, we're communicating because we want to be understood. And if we want to be understood, we should reciprocate, and we should make effort to want to understand. So for me, I actually give priority to first understanding somebody, because I think if I want to be understood, let me show my goodwill by first trying to understand. And that's what I used to tell my daughter all the time is if you want to be understood, first try and understand. So and she's pretty good at that. So so we are so anesthetized. We have so much fun. In this game the politicians play. Oh, we show somebody's photo, and Trump showed the photo of the woman who the Ukrainian woman who was savagely murdered on the train. That's a horrible thing. But a lot of other people were murdered. The same period of time. Nobody's showing their photos. Is their death less than any other person's death? Why is any human being's death worth less than anyone else? How much collateral damage, people like the word collateral damage, did we inflict on countries, like Iraq and Afghanistan and the Middle East? In my opinion, and again, it's my opinion, it's subject to debate. I believe that genocide is being, committed in Gaza. And I'm not saying we should be, we should be, not upset at the murder of the horrible assassination of Charlie Kirk, but then we're indifferent to a genocide of thousands of people, because it doesn't touch us personally. So we don't really care. So do we really care about the concept of people illegitimately committing acts of violence against other people, or do we only care if it's somebody we sympathize with, but we don't sympathize necessarily with the concept of people assassinating each other or committing acts of violence against each other? It's only if we have a relationship with somebody and empathy towards that person that it becomes a terrible act, because we have empathy with the person. It's not the act itself; it's the empathy we feel towards that individual. As I said, I'm sure everyone. I'm sure that the people who are horrified, at Charlie Kirk's assassination, don't feel the same way as the people in Minnesota that were assassinated that period of time, and it's vice versa. So I'm not saying it's unique to them, and I'm not trying to describe them as any worse than anyone else. I'm just trying to illustrate the point is that if it impacts us, where we feel we have a personal attachment to the circumstances, then we think it's terrible. But it's terrible because we have a personal attachment to us and we take it personally. And if it's somebody else that we have no engagement or attachment to, we have an absence of empathy and we feel completely disattached from it, and we really don't care. So I don't want this to be a time, given this horrendous act, and I feel horrible for Charlie Kirk's family, as I do for every family that suffers, a needless loss of life, and the sadness of having somebody that you love no longer be part of the life, and the fact that it was not done through natural means, but through somebody, taking the life away from somebody else, and nobody has the right to take away anything from anyone else. We don't have the right of claims against people's personhood nor their property. Nowhere do we have the right to do that. We can't rob other people. We can't cause physical harm to somebody. We can't covet what's not ours, and we can't take away what's not ours. We don't have the right to do that. No human being has the right to take anything from another human being, without their consent. This should be a pretty simply understood principle, that nobody should have anything taken away from them, without their consent. So I'm the reason why I had this time is because I feel very strongly that I don't know what it'll take for us to heal, not look for retribution, not look for vengeance, okay, but how we can begin, healing. I selected a couple of quotes that I'd like to share with people. Several of them are from Albert Einstein, who was a great humanist, besides being, a genius and maybe the greatest physicist of the 20th century. Albert Einstein was a humanist as well, and he wrote, a human being is part of the whole called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. I think that's a beautiful section. Einstein also said, if one day you have to choose between the world and love, remember this: if you choose the world, you'll be left without love. But if you choose love, with it, you will conquer the world. Einstein also said, peace is not simply the absence of conflict, but the existence of justice for all people. I'd also now like to do a couple of quotes from Martin Luther King. The last one was Martin Luther King, excuse me. The peace is not simply. Martin Luther King also said, men often hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they cannot communicate. They cannot communicate because they are separated. I think these are very powerful words that I hope people really think about. These people were great moral philosophers. Whatever people might have had what people perceived as their flaws in their lives, now that doesn't necessarily mean that their words are not words that we should be impacted by. Martin Luther King also said, this is something I strongly also agree with, and something that for those who are Christian or who find wisdom in the words of Jesus Christ, Martin Luther King said, love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. And that should be our goal with anybody that we know, is that we should try and convert, enemies into friends. And that doesn't mean you have to agree to agree. You can agree to disagree and still have a friendship. I have almost none of my friends share my political beliefs. I don't really have any friends that are, maybe one that is an anarchist. That most of my friends, some like Democrats, some like Republicans. I just hosted a dinner in New York, about 15 people up there. I'd say at least a third of them voted for Trump. And maybe a little bit more than that, and the others, probably were anti-never Trumpers. And everybody had a wonderful conversation at the dinner. Nobody got upset at each other. Nobody yelled at each other. There was not one aspersion or assault, or an insult towards anyone. It was a pleasant dinner, and everybody had a great time, because they treat each other with mutual respect. Even if parties might have found the other party's view, reprehensible, it doesn't mean that they feel that they have a right to necessarily, cause harm to somebody because they don't like somebody's beliefs, even if they believe those beliefs are evil. So, so I think and here's a statement that, I'm reading the statement because it's a combination of words by Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Edison, that they're almost exact same words. There's a little bit difference. So I'm going to read the whole quote, and it's really, part of it is Tom Jefferson and part of it is Thomas Edison. Nonviolence leads to the highest ethics, which is the goal of all evolution. Until we stop harming all other living beings, we are still savages. Yes, this behavior is savage. It's savage. And it's sad that we don't see it as savage behavior. Again, whether it was a Democrat that was killed, the state representative in Minnesota, or Charlie Kirk today, or the people that got killed, off the coast of Venezuela, or the people dying every day in Gaza, in Ukraine. Okay, this is savage behavior. Okay, how evolved are we as a species? How we evolved is evolution. We were given a brain. Okay, we were given cognitive skills. We were given 5 senses. We've been given a mouth to communicate. Okay, we've been given a heart. We've been given a soul. Okay, what are we supposed to use this for? We're not supposed to use these to commit acts of violence against somebody else. Okay, we got to try and really figure. We got to figure out how we really govern ourselves, and how we should be completely intolerant of any violence. So, finally, the Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Peace cannot be achieved through violence. It can only be attained through understanding." So, this is the message I would like to, impart today, is that let's understand each other better. Let's have our objective be not war, but peace. Let's not engage in culture wars. Let's acknowledge that there are cultural misunderstandings, okay? And let's resolve these cultural misunderstandings, okay? Let's accept the fact that in many policies there are differences of opinions, that there might be good faith, legitimate differences of opinions, and we should understand, where people's perspective, where they're coming at, on why they feel the way they do. So, and if we understand each other better, well, we might not solve all conflict, but at least we'll feel better about the fact that we're making an effort to understand each other and dealing with each person's humanity, as opposed to attacking that sense of humanity. So we should reject all calls of people saying, "I want retribution, I want revenge, I want vengeance," or all attempts to basically silence other people by saying it's your words that caused this. Okay, nobody should ever excuse their actions because of the words of somebody else. Okay, everybody's a free agent, very responsible for their own actions, and nobody should ever blame the words of somebody else for their behavior. Okay, then you're a child. Okay, then you're a dependent. Okay, if you can't assume responsibility for your own actions, and if you're blaming other people's words, you have every person has a responsibility to think about other people's words, to consider other people's words. But at the end, it's their judgment on whether to listen to certain people as opposed to listen to other people, because you hear a lot of words out there, and a lot of words that contradict each other, a lot of words that are in conflict or differences with each other. And ultimately, you have to be the judge of the veracity of the words, and probably there's some truth in everybody's words and a whole bunch of stuff that's not true in everybody's words, because it's their feelings, their impressions, their intuitions, that can all, deceive us. So, so I just hope, not that I think that my words really have significant consequence, but whether they have consequence or not, I'm never going to give up trying, is that, every day we have to challenge ourselves. How can we become the best versions of ourselves? We have no control over anything else in life but ourselves. And that's the only thing we should attempt to control, are ourselves. We have no right to control anything other than ourselves. Nobody is subordinate to us. Nobody is a subject to us. Okay. Everybody is a peer to us. And so that we only make the world better by us, each person trying to become a better person every single day. And if the other person doesn't do it, it's not our job to force them to. It isn't. It's only our job to force them to do it if, because they don't get a better person, they commit a crime. Then we have a process that deals with people who engage in criminal activities, and we should trust that process. And if we don't trust that process, we should replace the people we chose to enforce that process. And if we are in the minority and that majority disagree with our solutions, we should just accept that, and keep trying to make, there are a number of things we can do. If we live in a jurisdiction where our view is a minority, we can either sit back and say, I can keep coming up with better arguments, or accept that I still enjoy enough living here that, I don't necessarily get all the policies I want, but I get enough of them, have a decent enough life here that I choose to stay. And if I don't, I can always move. We have two legs, and we can walk and we can move and we can pack up and we go to other jurisdictions that might meet our requirements, that might meet our wants, desires, better than the place we're living. So it's not like we can force the majority to change at our discretion. We just make other choices that are better for us, without necessarily feeling that we have to influence the choices other people are making that they think are best for them. So, when I have conversations, yes, I hope that, I convince people of my point of view, but I don't like to have conversations like I'm right and you're wrong. I like to express my point of view. I like to listen to good arguments on the other side. The better arguments that I get from other people on their point of view when they disagree with me makes me smarter. I mean, when I have a flaw in my thinking, I like my flaws being exposed. So I don't get upset when my flaws in my thinking are exposed. I like when my flaws are exposed because then my thinking gets better. And that's what I communicate for. I don't communicate to convince other people. I communicate to create mutual understanding and hopefully some level of entertainment where people like the process. But it's like if I can't convince the other person, I'm not upset. And if people who meet with me and can't convince me and they get upset, then that's somebody I'll have a recurring relationship with, because if the relationship is predicated upon them converting me into an image of themselves, that's not a relationship. That's an act of vanity. That's an act of vanity where they want me to be a version of them rather than accepting me as a version of myself. We should all accept people as the versions of who they are. If you're not, then every interaction with the other person is really never about that person. It's all about you. And if you're going to interact with other people, it should be about them, not you. Okay? And if you want people to be like you, then you're making that relationship all about you, not about the other person. If you have the capacity of making it about the other person, then you'll never have conflicts with other people, even if you completely disagree with them. Because you're not going to get upset over the disagreement. What you will get is a better understanding of that person. And that's a great thing. If you have a conversation, you disagree, and you get a greater insight into that person, that's a great thing. Whether you agree or disagree with not, that shouldn't be the point. The point is to get to understand each other, a little bit better, so you can have more empathy towards each other. So again, I'm going to, I meant this to only be 30 minutes, but I tend to be long-winded and talk too much, and repeat myself too much. So I want to summarize with one more quote from Martin Luther King, and I will re-emphasize the quote from Jefferson and Edison one more time. Martin Luther King said, "Nonviolence is the answer to the crucial political and moral questions of our time. The need for man to overcome oppression and violence without resorting to oppression and violence. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love." And again, I will repeat the Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Edison words: "Nonviolence leads to the highest ethics, which is the goal of all evolution. Until we stop harming all of the living beings, we are still savages." So please share with me that we can all experience our evolution together, that we can every day become better versions of ourselves, and every day be happy in our lives, and happy to the point where we don't feel any need or desire to cause any harm to another human being, independent of whatever they do. So that's my commitment to myself, and I'd like to encourage everyone else to avoid the words of blaming one party, blaming another. Forget about this party crap. Forget about this tribal behavior. We're all individuals. We should each be judged by our individuality. We should be judged by our words. We should be judged by our deeds. We should be judged by our actions. We should be judged by our behavior. Okay? But our judgment should only come as a result of us, not us and the group that we participate in, because we go to a ballot box, once a year or 2 years or 4 years, and choose a certain candidate, that we might not necessarily choose the person we like the best, but the person we like the least, that we dislike the least. So, so please, no collective punishment. Everybody should be judged on an individual basis and based upon their behavior, their deeds, and their actions. And the judgment should be left to the legal process. If somebody's done something illegal, if somebody's done not illegal, we should not be vigilantes. It's not our job to mete out justice. We live in a society, we accept certain rules, we accept certain procedures, and we don't have the right to basically become a vigilante, and basically use force against any other human being. That's just not acceptable. No, it's savage behavior. And we should and we should all really understand that every act of violence, whether it leads to murder, rape, violent crime, is savage behavior. Okay, we should not accept any of it. And and thank you so much for. And I hope people can, whether you agree or disagree with me, I hope you consider them not only my words but the words of people, wiser than me, and people who really, devoted their lives to considering these issues, and tried to make an impact on mankind and humanity in a positive way. So thank you very much. Bye.